Our guest is Ande Kolp, Executive Director of the ARC Maryland. To set the stage, Ande, tell us a little bit about the ARC Maryland.
Of course, thank you for having me. The ARC Maryland started in the 1950s by a group of parents who envisioned a better life for their children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And since the 50s, the ARC has grown into a national movement. Nationally, there is 600 chapters throughout the United States. And in Maryland, there are 10 chapters of the ARC that provide direct supports to people with disabilities and their families in all 24 counties in Baltimore City.
How many individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are supported by these organizations?
Well, there's about 95,000 Marylanders with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Not all of those individuals have developmental disabilities funding, but the ARC touches a significant portion of all people. Direct services, however, we support about a little over 5,000 people in residential day and employment services across the whole state.
So the state's intellectual and developmental disability community is currently facing the possibility of significant budget crisis. Why is this occurring?
Well, the coronavirus pandemic has had big impacts to our state's economy. And as a result, revenue projections in the state show that our operating budget will be short about $2.1 to $2.6 billion. That's currently the amount that we're short to fund all of the components of the FY21 budget. And since most of the state revenue, much of the state revenue is dependent on income tax withholdings, and that generally makes up about 45% of our whole budget. And so, right now, with unemployment high, the governor is looking for ways to make cuts or generate revenue, and enlisting the help of the comptroller, the treasurer, and the secretary of the Department of Budget Management. So they have incredible power at this time on the budget.
Shouldn't the intellectual and developmental disability community shoulder part of this responsibility like other agencies that are receiving state funding?
Yeah, well, we're still in a pandemic, and included in the group of essential workers are thousands of direct support professionals who every day are providing one-on-one personal care and support to some of Maryland's most vulnerable citizens. And much of the care is intimate, so there's little, if any, room for social distancing. And the disability service organizations around the state, like the ARC, have continued to provide these essential healthcare services under this environment, shouldering increased costs of delivering the care for personal protective equipment, providing crisis and incentive pay for frontline workers, and delivering services in smaller groupings. But the current in this current environment into the future, services need to be tailored to be provided in smaller numbers and operating capacities, and our funding isn't sufficient to meet the increased needs. So continue to operate, these Medicaid providers are going to need increases to their funding, not cuts. So cuts would threaten all of the advances that we've made to ensure that citizens with disabilities can continue to live and work in their communities.
So you've said that the funding cuts by the state would also hurt the parents of the people with disabilities. Why?
Well, there are several thousand people who receive support during the daytime hours, and that allows working parents respite and a peace of mind that their adult children are being supported during the day in safe environments to work and recreate and learn. For 21-year-olds exiting high school in this past June, there are already a couple thousand young adults in Maryland who haven't connected with a day support provider to start services in July. And with providers slowing their admissions to their programs because of financial concerns and uncertainty in the pandemic, the lack of services will not only affect the transitioning youth, but also their families and the state's economy if these parents suddenly are unable to work due to a lack of support during the day for their adult children.
So the disability community has made a great deal of progress over the years, from closing state institutions to increasing employment opportunities for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Would funding cuts by the state impact these advances?
Yeah, most certainly. So we're looking into the crystal ball, and it's clear that the future of our services will need to be individualized or services provided in much smaller groupings. Transportation that used to be provided to people with disabilities in like a 15-passenger van on a fixed route is going to cost more to be delivered individually to people or in smaller transportation groupings. So while we understand the need of the state to tighten its belt when looking into budget situations such as the one we have right now, we also remember, back when life didn't have these critical services, and we had institutions in Maryland back then, and we've come a long way and put a lot of effort into creating community for all. It benefits all of us to be all together in the community. So while we know that these challenges exist, we encourage our leaders to continue to consider both the short-term and long-term impacts that cuts would have on thousands of citizens for generations to come.
So what is your message to Governor Hogan?
Our state has a proud and rich history of doing the right thing, even when it's not easy or requires more effort. And our governor during this pandemic has shown us that he has the ability to and drive to step up and be creative and do what's right to keep citizens safe and Maryland moving in the right direction. And so we're counting on him now to continue moving us in the right direction by protecting and prioritizing funding for thousands of his most vulnerable citizens with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families.
Andy, I want to thank you for joining us today on Citybiz. Your insights and passion for the intellectual and development disability community is wonderful. It's an important contribution.
Well, thank you so much for all you're doing too. I wanted to get this important message out to our governor and to people in decision-making power out there. We really need the whole community's help on this one. So thank you.